Andrew Huberman has one of the most popular health podcasts on the planet. Since 2019, he has amassed over 10 million followers across all platforms and appeared on many popular podcasts like The Joe Rogan Experience and Tim Ferriss. Today we're going to try and answer the question, can you trust him? In this video, you can expect to learn what Andrew Huberman gets right, what he gets wrong, and how you as a consumer of health and fitness information can learn to identify the useful from the useless. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dean and I'm one of the nutritionists here at Triage Method. We're a team of doctors, nutritionists and scientists that use cutting-edge medical science and practical fitness experience to help you transform your body, optimize your health and dominate life. It's certainly not a coincidence that Huberman has gained so many followers, as people really resonate with his content. You only have to look at what people are saying in his comment section to see that he is making a real impact. As a nutrition and exercise professional, much of what he says makes sense to me and is credible. And he also gets a lot of good guests on his podcast, such as Peter Attia, Lane Norton and Cal Newport. I have no doubt that people have improved their health and quality of life from consuming Andrew's content and becoming more aware of the importance of nutrition, exercise, sleep and sunlight exposure. But it is still important to be critical of his information, and there's plenty that he gets wrong. Although there's a lot of helpful stuff in his videos and podcasts, there's also a lot of dubious claims made by both him and his guests. There's a couple of things that I want to focus on here that should demonstrate to you that you shouldn't blindly put your trust in Huberman, especially around health topics. First, he has spoken multiple times about the use of certain supplements to increase your testosterone, namely turkesterone, Fedosia agrestis, and Tongkat Ali.
But there's a category of supplements that are very interesting that for most people who aren't exploring testosterone augmentation for sport, work very well to increase testosterone by about 100 to 200 points. Not, 300, not a tripling or anything like that. And the main ones are two substances. One is called Tongkat Ali.
Oh yeah, that stuff's real, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, because
And Fedosia agrestis is a Nigerian shrub. It's taken from a Nigerian shrub, and it stimulates the release of luteinizing hormone, which is going to come out of the pituitary. And in men, it will increase testosterone output from the testes by way of increasing luteinizing hormone, maybe subtle increase in estrogen as well.
there are incredible plant compounds out there. Like there's this thing that's now kind of going wild on the internet. I've never tried it, but it's called turkesterone.
Turkesterone.
Yeah, they call it Turk. And this is basically it. And I actually I did one episode of my podcast all about hormones, and I went deep into this literature, and turkesterone side by side with DECA or another testosterone derivative, it essentially acts the same way. It increases testosterone and performance and recovery. You know,
how much does it increase it by?
Equivalent.
Really?
So, you know,
so this plant compound is equivalent to DECA?
Essentially.
Now, it would be fantastic if these supplements actually created meaningful changes in your testosterone, but when you look at the data that's available, it's not as promising as Dr. Huberman would lead you to believe. There's no data to support the idea that using turkesterone has the same outcomes as an anabolic agent like DECA, and the studies that have been done on muscle building outcomes on turkesterone haven't been that promising either. While Fedosia agrestis did show some promising results in mice, there's only 6 studies that have been done on this, 1 for each of Andrew's mistresses, and none have been done in humans. And there might also be some negative impacts on liver and kidney function from using this. Of the studies that were done, they were all conducted by the same researchers, so we would need to see some independent analysis done on this, and more importantly, some studies done on humans. While this systematic review and meta-analysis did show improvements in testosterone by supplementing with Tongkat Ali, this was mostly seen in men that had low testosterone, with pretty much no effect in men that had healthy levels of testosterone. There's some other issues with these studies, as they were all funded by a company that sells Tongkat Ali, and some of the researchers were even employees of this company. A substantial conflict of interest here for Huberman is the fact that the podcast is sponsored by a company that sells Fedosia agrestis and Tongkat Ali, and this is not the only time that you'll see a conflict of interest like this. Athletic Greens is another supplement that sponsors the Huberman Lab podcast, and again, we encounter some issues.
Greens, and the reason I still take Athletic Greens once or twice every day is that it covers all of my foundational needs for vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. In fact, when people ask me what supplements they should take, if I were going to recommend just one supplement, it would be Athletic Greens because of the enormous number of biological factors that it impacts in a positive way.
Greens powders do have some utility, but in my opinion, they are fairly similar to using a multivitamin. Athletic Greens use a proprietary blend, which means they don't have to give you the specific dosages of each ingredient on their label. This is quite important because it means that many of the ingredients that are included in the supplement will simply not be at a high enough dose to create desired outcomes from the inclusion of that ingredient. Because of how high spirulina, lecithin, pea protein, and inulin are on the ingredients list, and how much fiber you're getting per serving coming from the inulin, we can safely assume that the ingredients lower down on the list are woefully underdosed. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that Athletic Greens is €107 for a month's supply. When you compare this to the amount of fruit and vegetables you could buy for €107, it becomes quite clear that Athletic Greens is pretty much a scam. If you'd like to read more deeply into these supplements and any of the other supplements that Huberman recommends, I'd use examine.com or consumerlab.com as reputable sources of information when looking into supplements. Another one of Huberman's big claims is that you should delay your coffee consumption by 90 to 120 minutes in the morning to improve its effectiveness and reduce an afternoon crash.
Doesn't caffeine just make you feel like you're not tired?
So this is a really cool mechanism. There's actually a trick to avoid the afternoon crash. It's not a trick, it's biology. But caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It basically, as the longer you're awake, adenosine, or Matt Walker would say adenosine, adenosine builds up in your bloodstream. It's what makes you feel fatigued. Caffeine essentially blocks the adenosine receptor, but then when caffeine wears off, the adenosine that's still around binds to that receptor and you crash. You feel really sleepy. So one thing that you can do is when you wake up in the morning, don't ingest caffeine for the first 90 minutes or so. Like really push that off so that the adenosine and adenosine receptor interactions can all take place and dissipate.
One thing that you'll see Andrew do a lot in his podcasts is engage in mechanistic reasoning, where he will look at a mechanism, in this case the relationship between caffeine and adenosine receptors, and then draw a conclusion that's relevant to what happens in the human body. This is quite problematic because often what we see in mechanisms quite simply does not translate to human physiology. This is why when pharmaceutical companies are testing drugs, they have a step-by-step process from mechanism to drug design to animal research and then human research to test the drug's efficacy. There's no studies that demonstrate a beneficial effect from delaying your caffeine consumption by an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning, with one group of researchers concluding that there is no evidence that caffeine ingestion upon waking is somehow responsible for an afternoon crash, or that delaying consumption would somehow prevent this if it did occur. So this is again another one of Andrew's porkies. Now you might be watching this and thinking, Andrew Huberman is a Stanford professor with a PhD in neurobiology and is clearly highly intelligent. I should be able to trust him. And you should be able to trust him within his specific area of expertise. The Latin expression of ne supra crepidam is quite fitting here, as it translates to the shoemaker should not cast judgment beyond the shoe. Huberman frequently speaks outside of his area of expertise, particularly with topics of general health, nutrition, pain science, exercise science, immune health, and skin health. It's very easy to be fooled by authority bias, where we automatically trust someone with knowledge and qualifications in a health field, even if it's nothing got to do with their area of specific expertise. You can see this demonstrated in human psychology, where we tend to trust someone simply by the fact that they're wearing a white lab coat, which implicitly assumes that they must have knowledge in science or medicine. Huberman is also very well spoken and charismatic, which when combined with his usage of sciencey sounding jargon, increases his credibility even further. In this case, we want to adopt what Dr. David Grimes calls information hygiene when we're consuming health content online. You can start by simply adopting a more skeptical and questioning nature around the content that you see, especially from the likes of Andrew Huberman and the rest of his guests. Some of his guests that have been criticised for misinformation and pseudoscience include Robert Lustig, Matthew Walker, Rhonda Patrick, David Sinclair, and Sarah Gottfried. Robert Lustig in particular has spouted a lot of misinformation around the toxicity of fructose and how it has apparently driven the obesity epidemic. Much of what he spouts is completely false, and there's a mountain of evidence out there that contradicts his main points. Other reputable experts have criticised Huberman and his guests' positions on topics like immunology, dental health, and sunscreen. Andrea Love is a PhD in immunology and has a fantastic article on some of these topics, so I'll link that down below if you'd like to read more on it. So with all that being said, how can you be certain that the health and fitness information you're consuming is evidence-based and actually helpful to you? I like to use this checklist when I'm trying to decide if a piece of information is useful. First, does this person have specific expertise in the area that they're talking about? In the case of Huberman, he's not a nutrition expert, so we need to be careful with his dietary recommendations. Do they have a financial incentive baked into the content? An example here is talking about supplements that boost testosterone and then being sponsored by a company that sells Tongkat Ali. Remember that just because they say studies show doesn't mean they're right. Can they back up their claims with robust evidence? Always be skeptical about studies that have been done in rodents or in petri dishes, and remember that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Are they very conclusive in their statements? Remember that most scientists worth their salt will rarely state something as an absolute fact. Instead, they'll usually use words like probably, studies suggest, and potentially. Next, you want to check your own biases. Do you want this claim to be true because it backs up your worldview? A good exercise here is to Google opposing views and see if it changes your mind at all. It's also important to ask, are you being emotionally manipulated? Health and fitness content online does a really good job of amplifying our pain and providing a solution for a fee. And if you're unsure, look to experts in the specific field, do some cross-referencing and see if they agree or disagree with the content creator. You're already in the right place by watching our videos here on YouTube. And if you'd like more evidence-based health and nutrition content, then check out this video up here.